Good morning, everybody, and good evening for those people joining us from other parts of the world. I'd like to thank you all for joining this Enzen knowledge briefing today, which is how adopting a smart cybersecurity approach protects critical national infrastructure. I am very, very glad to be able to welcome some really expert panel members this morning. So, Phil, if we can go to the next slide. And I'm going to ask the gentlemen on these screens and on this deck to also just give a brief introduction. So firstly, Steve, welcome.
Hello, thanks, John. Okay, so thanks guys for joining. I know it's an early start, but hopefully it'll be something really useful. So I'm Steve O'Sullivan. I'm the head of cyber practice at Enzen Global UK, specialised in smart cybersecurity and certainly in the critical network infrastructure area. Been involved in cybersecurity for many years, worked in large organisations, but the last few years I've taken my focus to the smart cyber because I believe this is where we need to be and this will help industry overall.
Brilliant, thank you. Enrique, welcome.
Hi, John. Hi, Steve. Good morning. Glad to be here today with you. I'm Enrique Villa. I'm CTO for Wellness Techgroup. We are a smart company with a focus on cybersecurity for the smart projects as well. So I'm glad to be here today. Hope that we have an interesting discussion.
Thank you, Enrique. And where are you dialing in from today? What's your location, just so we can?
I'm in Seville, south of Spain.
Fantastic. Welcome. Thank you. And finally, Alan. Good morning. Oh, good evening for you.
Good evening. Yes, indeed. From here in Australia, it's well into the evening. It's wonderful to be here. My name's Alan Mihalic. I'm the IoT Security Institute president. The IoT is an industry-based organisation that provides cybersecurity frameworks and cyber certification for a smart world. And very happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining us. As we said, from all over the world, we're looking forward to getting viewpoints from those different locations as well. So today we're going to really talk through, I suppose, 6 key areas. I'm going to just run through them very briefly so everybody's clear. We're going to talk about defining critical national infrastructure in today's world. Steve's going to talk very briefly on that, as well as the main critical national infrastructure cyber challenges and threats. So we're not going to dwell too much on those because I think they're pretty well known and I think they're quite well defined within the industry and around. So we're then really going to get to the meat of this webinar, which is around what is smart cyber, what is adopting smart cyber in critical national infrastructure, what does it look like, the behaviours and cultural factors associated with that, and therefore what are the outcomes of a smart cyber approach and what do we want to get to. So I'm going to hand over to Steve. He's going to talk to us very much about the first 2 points. So Steve, if you wouldn't mind talking about those, that'd be great.
Okay, sure. So CNI, critical network infrastructure. I'm not going to go over all of the deep details of all the industry sectors, but what I will say is becoming much more interconnected. And I will say that for us, certainly in the UK, probably in Spain and Australia as well, CNI is being redefined. It's a case of shifting sands all the time. COVID has been a large disruptor for how we see CNI. We all know that CNI would be utilities, energy, water, healthcare, transport. But now it's just broadened out to even the organisations that make your PPE mask are part of CNI. So it is a case of shifting sands, and it is a case of being fluid and interconnected. A much larger landscape, and there's a recognition, I think, and so we're going to talk about a little bit more, that in order to define or redefine CNI, we must step back and look at it through the new lens of smart, digital, and data, cyber, and not through the traditional viewpoint that exists, be it public CNI or private CNI. So it is a case of a new type of CNI that exists alongside the traditional CNI. This is something we're going to explore today in today's webinar.
Fantastic, thank you. There we go.
So challenges in CNI, we all know of ransomware attacks, and we all know of insider threat attacks, and there's been many published over the last year or so in America, Colonial Pipeline, Florida, water sector. There's many ransomware type attacks. For us, and certainly at Enzen and some of our research, we are looking at the actual smart related challenges that are taking place. And some of those will relate to the traditional attack vectors, malware, ransomware, resilience or lack of resilience. But we also need to accept that there's going to be a big threat if we don't move forward. And that big threat really is a threat that have been people working in CNI. So this is a call out to all those CNI operators out there, people in charge, the CISOs, of not having people that are seeing the new CNI-based attacks through the smart lens, being trained and being aware of how their unawareness of the digital programs and the digital risk, the data transformation, the new cyber, how if they don't know and understand the new frame they're looking through, they also present the risk. So we have to always remember that risks come from people. Ultimately, people buy equipment, and it is a blended approach to risk. So challenges, and there's some wonderful stats on the screen here, and there's lots of research in these areas. This needs to be done a lot more. There's a lot more sophisticated attacks. There's a lot more AI and cognitive-based attacks, and we are going to miss those if we still see the challenges to CNI through a compliance-based framework as opposed to a sophisticated smart related framework.
Okay, but so there's also skills and a knowledge gap there.
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thank you. And then CNI cyber threats. So I think you touched on this just there, but if you could expand a little bit on that. So
cyber threats, and I think I started off by mentioning that we know that ransomware is a huge threat, and we know from going back in the past, IT versus OT. There's a wonderful term called an air gap system where the IT and the OT platforms should never ever be connected up. And there's a wonderful paper by John Byers that talks about the unicorn and the air gap, which really says that in today's converged world, and something that Alan will talk about a lot more as we go forward, as the air gap disappears and as the IT environments and the OT environments start to converge, your threat landscape and your threat service increases a lot more.
Yeah.
And we're going to be playing catch up. And there's a whole raft of cyber related attacks that didn't really affect the OT infrastructure in the past, which is in a way the foundation of what critical network infrastructure is now going to seep through into that. And it may be that someone brings in something to malware on a USB. It may be that someone does a remote login to a system. Either way, there's a compromise of the system, and there's a virus on malware put in there. So threats are not only from nation states. Threats are from misconfigurations of systems as well.
Yeah.
And CNI has a lot of systems, a lot of assets. Understanding your assets and where those assets are is a key part, because you can only manage what you know you have. So there's a whole range of threats that affect people, processes, and assets that exist now, and going forward, that's only going to increase with the move towards smart digital.
Yeah. So the risks to every organisation are increasing exponentially.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you. Get on the next slide, please. So what is smart cyber? So I think I'm going to hand over to Enrique now. I'm going to ask you the question: what is smart cyber, and how do you see smart cyber? I suppose globally, but also from the very Spanish point of view, and maybe the Latin American point of view as well. Enrique, if you could touch on that, that would be great.
Thank you, John. Just to start with, I just want to agree with what Steve was saying about threats before. That's what the trend that we are seeing here in Spain with utilities and CNI in the year 2020, which is the last data that we've got. The threats have increased here, and not only to CNI, but to essential operators that are in the supply chain of the CNI as well. So we have seen an uptake on that trend. So with that being said, with what is smart cyber, from our point of view on what we are seeing here? Well, we see smart cyber as a conjunction of privacy, on traditional cyber, and all the data and digitalization that is happening in several sectors. We need to remember that depending on the country, but more or less in Europe with the NIS directive, we've got the same CNI sectors inside, but the scope inside these sectors is changing because of the new projects that are being blended in, that IT-OT convergence that Steve was talking about, but also the industrial IoT and the IoT as well, that are enabling more projects, more value to be added to utilities, to citizens, to cities, and all of that landscape is blending together with the digitalization, the privacy, which is a concern as well, and this new era. So smart cyber is a vision. It's a proactive vision that covers all of these points to move forward. Compliance, skill set, people, digital, data. I mean, it's a complex term because there are a lot of moving parts there. But we need to see clear that all of these stages form part of the solution, and we need to bind them together. That is smart cyber in our point of view.
Thank you. And Alan, I want to pass that over to you in the Southern Hemisphere as well, and really understand your viewpoint on smart cyber, please.
Yes, I agree entirely with what Enrique is putting forward. But what I would like to add is to understand the case, or to put the case for smart cyber, which has resulted directly from the motivation landscape for cyber attacks with regards to CNI. Traditionally, we had a very defacing, a way of belittling organizations, but capitalism has reached the hacking community, both professional and individually, and it has monetized its efforts, and it's also politicized its efforts. And CNI is in particular a sector of great interest because of the impact that it has on the political, economical, and societal aspects of our existence. So smart cyber is effectively saying we've acknowledged that the traditional passive defense that we utilized for decades is no longer relevant in a sophisticated attack scenario against critical infrastructure. We need to become far more proactive. We need to use intelligence. We used to use tools, and we used to be proactive. In other words, we almost have to adopt a military position, a military intelligence stance that says we're going to go out and find who's out to get us. We're going to go out and find where they're planting these zero-day attacks. We're going to go out and ensure our defenses are secured before we're attacked. And this is a critical shift in smart cyber, in that it's requiring that organizations prepare themselves in a way that is far more proactive in their cyber defense strategy. That's why smart cyber has become effectively the next step, because enabled by a new generation of technology, a new generation of cyber professionals, but also because we have artificial intelligence and machine learning that is empowering smart cyber professionals to be able to do what we don't do very well, and that is to process high volumes of data. Now we're in a position where we can do scenario-based situations. We can have real-time responses. We can have playbooks. We can say, well, okay, we're collating all this data. Now let's get the smart cyber people to interpret that and do something with it. So, I mean, supporting the overall response to smart cyber is one that states that you need to start considering your cybersecurity capability from a smart cyber perspective.
So it sounds like smart cyber is really changing the landscape, and the advances in technology and the advances in connectivity and sensors and IoT all coming into play now create more risk and more opportunities for hackers and ransomware attacks and malware attacks to come into the system. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely echo what Alan and Enrique just said. and here at Enzen, we've got an applied research centre. Our expertise and our research is heavily focused on how we can help our clients, and our clients are primarily they form part of the critical network infrastructure, and so we have decided to step back and away from the traditional cyber that we know exists, and that's not to do any disregard to frameworks like NIST or Cyber Assurance Framework, but to say, look, and Alan just mentioned this, that you can have these compliance frameworks, and you can have your traditional cyber people work through, and they're quite good. And NCSC in the UK have actually done quite a lot of work. What we're saying is that, at Enzen UK, we're taking a step forward, and the IoT Security Institute and the Wellness Techgroup are doing the same, and we are saying that we need to really push and wave that flag for smart cyber for the industries that we serve. And so our value is in we're having a discussion today, trying to bring the smart cyber model, methodology to our clients, to make them aware, to make them think about the way things are, and how we can help each other to protect the UK and Spain and Australia's critical network infrastructure. It was a metaphor, it was undefined, and we know the term smart X can be applied to smart cities, smart universities, smart transport systems. It's being used in a ubiquitous manner.
Okay.
But we will bring that back and say, let's reframe that in the context of CNI. That's why we're here today.
Fantastic. Thank you. Can we move on to the next view, please? So, Alan, I'm gonna pass this over to you first of all, just to talk about how can you adopt smart cyber in CNI, in that critical national infrastructure.
Well, yeah, it is. It's one of mindset, as I said earlier. It's a one of intent, and it's one of a collaborative nature with the many interfaces that we are now obliged to consider. And as Steve mentioned, the word smart is interchangeable. Smart cyber, smart cities, smart preventative maintenance for industrial control systems. They work together. So adopting a smart cyber in the first instance is to understand your ecosystem and have people who work within that ecosystem that have a very clear understanding of what smart cyber means. I mean, if you spoke to someone doing security 20 years ago, they would say to you, well, this is the company, this is the firewall, this is the perimeter, we're safe on the inside and all the bad guys are on the outside. Done. We know what we have to do. So implementing Cyber is to understand the omnipresence of technology, of devices, of sensors, and the sheer impossibility of reacting to something when you're talking in the multitudes of millions. You need smart cyber. So is firstly the ability to understand security by design. So irrespective of what you're doing, the security is at the table, be it at the design of a building and its physical controls, be it at the design of an IoT solution. And so that's firstly an understanding of your ecosystem. Secondly, it's the ability to have the appropriate smart frameworks and the smart design patterns and the smart technology that allows you to consider across the entire ecosystem where the touch points are, where the interface points are. That drives smart cyber with regards to understanding what the legal and regulatory requirements are within your given sector, because key to understanding an appropriate cyber smart position within an organization is to understand what the obligations of that organization are. And that's not an easy thing to define, because when you're discussing such a broad area, you need to understand the exact objective of what you're protecting. So you have to be very attuned with legal and regulatory requirements. We're talking about commerciality now as much as we're talking about functionality. Okay, so let me give you a classic example. A smart cyber requires expertise in technical design, governance, but it also requires a skill in understanding threat landscapes. For example, a new power plant has a market price. It attracts hackers, it attracts state-sponsored attacks that now have got people who are on, you know, regular hours. They get annual leave. They take holidays with their families, right? These are hackers, right? So the mindset of cyber smart is you need to understand what you're dealing with, right? It comes back to that idea of military intelligence almost. We're not talking about a guy with a hoodie anymore. We're talking about a well-funded organization. So any organization that looks at adopting smart cyber firstly has to understand, you know, the nature of the adversary and the nature of what they need to protect in terms of policy, frameworks, technology, and then fundamental common sense as well. So it's a very broad answer, but what I am endeavoring to communicate here is that the model has changed, the complexities have changed, and the sophistication of the attackers has increased. And they're utilizing the very same tools that we're utilizing to defend ourselves. We must remember that. So that's a very key aspect of adopting a smart cyber methodology within CNI.
Thanks, Alan. Thank you. So Enrique, I think, you know, we've heard there that where hackers may be opportunists and part-time, they're now full-time with many tools at their disposal. So how do you counter that? How do you think about, you know, what is the smart cyber approach that you need to adopt in terms of that to counter those professional hackers, as we should call them?
Yep, I think that Alan's response was spot on in several key points regarding that. For example, knowing yourself, knowing your ecosystem, and that's something imperative. From our lens, we have been witnessing the last 5, 6, 7 years the implementation of new technologies in CNIs, in utilities, even in cities as well, which are getting their own kind of CNI themselves because of the technologies that they're implementing, but we can talk about that later. And the trend that we are seeing here is that sometimes when people don't understand exactly why or what they are doing something, you know, we tend to shove that under the carpet, you know, and we can't do that anymore because of what you are saying, because of the professionalization of the cybercrime that has happened. And also, we cannot forget that when we're talking about CNI, we're talking about high value targets as well. So we are not only facing cybercrime, which is a tough spot on their own, but we are facing other nation state intents, etc. Right? So our threat landscape needs to take that into consideration. We need trained people. We need to have people that are well trained in cyber intelligence, in cyber defense, and sometimes the organizations doesn't have that, and they need to rely on professionals. So having good internal support, you know, from management, relying on professionals that can leverage that information and can educate, you know, CNIs, and also having a framework, using a framework that at least covers, you know, the business, the people, the technology, and the compliance aspects. At least, I think that's a good start to be able to tackle down the CNI and the smart cyber approach. Thank you,
Enrique. Thank you. I guess that just leads me on to one question, Steve. There, which this occurs to me at the moment that cybersecurity probably sits under and is a pillar of one person's organisation. So maybe the CTO or the CIO. Do you see that actually this actually may become an entire job section on its own, because, you know, a chief of cybersecurity or something along those lines? Because it seems to me that this is an ever expanding threat level.
Absolutely, and you know, I will actually be quite open on this one. And we use cyber professionals to protect cyber threats, and we have cyber frameworks to comply to perceived cyber threats and risk. All very good. Mentioned before, NCSC, the NIST regulations, the cyber assurance framework in America, and NERC. What we're saying here is that this is not enough, and it will not be enough going forward. And Alan alluded to this in his previous answer quite well. Effectively, There is no digitalization, there is no smart without increasing your cyber threat landscape. And what that means in terms of CNI is that the CISO or the CTO in the CNI organization can no longer work in isolation and be in charge. You need to consider those data programs that are happening, secure data, intelligent data that's taking place.
Yeah.
You need to consider the digital transformation programs from the CDO, Chief Digital Officer. It has to see this in a truly interconnected honeycomb pattern as we have on the screen here. And that means that you're no longer seeing your cyber threats through that single lens. It's a prism. And I think the picture on the screen here really says it quite well. You have to have all of these individual component parts fully meshed.
Yeah.
And this is not going to be owned by one particular person in CNI. It will no longer be owned only by the CISO. It will be owned by the Chief Digital Officer. It will be owned by business functions. At the end of the day, cyber risk, digital risk, smart related risk are business risk.
Yeah.
And they're critically impacted in terms of CNI, in terms of physical harm and disruption you can cause to people. So that lens of how you approach smart cyber in CNI is now morphed into much more than just cybersecurity. And we at Enzen, as I mentioned before, doing a lot of research in this area. In fact, I think we're one of the only companies in the UK that are doing this research, because we see, we've got our partners here, and we're all seeing from the same page that you can't just use the old tools to protect your industry. You've got to see this. And someone might say, oh, this is not a case of the emperor's new clothes. You've just added the term smart, and you've just created a new thing. Well, I'm going to say absolutely not. If you want to see it like that, you can, but you're really risking your organization.
Yeah.
You need to accept that we're in a new world order. Things have changed. Digital, data, people skills, culture, mindset all need to blend together to protect CNI. And I think the picture on the screen there will give those people watching the view that they have to. They can't just focus on the smart compliance, top right hand corner at 2 o'clock. They can't just focus on the smart supply chain, the resilience. They have to see everything holistically.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. Can I ask, when we talk about adopting smart cyber, can I ask you how you view that as well?
Oh, I agree entirely. I mean, the whole concept is let's have a look at a smart city. Let's have a look at what organizations are trying to achieve, what communities, what governments are trying to achieve, and the technology that they are required to enable to get there. And underpinning all of that is the smarts of the technology, which allow you to achieve, to deliver, and to affect people's lives, be it for the benefit, for convenience, and even in fact, upon their own safety and sense of security. So as Steve alluded to simply say it's just putting smart in front of it, oh no, the world's changed. The smart technologies has changed the world, and we need to reflect our controls and our capabilities to meet that. And one of the things that I want to draw out about smart, and it might sound almost contradictory, is that smart technology works on the foundation of trust. Returning investment primarily works on the foundation of trust. If you, a government, a CNI, whoever it may be, wishes to implement new technologies that have smart components, and hence by the definition, complexity of access, complexity of management, and ultimately the complexity of securing those assets, then trust is your return on your investment. And traditionally, you can rebuild a server, you can do a backup, you can do the rest of it. But smart cyber is about not only securing technology, but ensuring the trust from the community. And what I mean by that is, if you put in a government initiative, a community initiative that manages data governance or manages communications and lighting and whatever it is, and that goes down, you lose the trust. When you lose the trust, you lose the adoption. When you lose the adoption, you lose the number of users and participants, but ultimately you lose your return on investment. So when we speak about smart technology and smart cyber, we're saying we're bringing, again, a new set of tools that understands what's at stake and how we should approach the management and the security of those assets. To take an old world view and say, well, you know, we just make sure this is done and this is done, is not understanding the new technology spheres that we have to secure. And again, I repeat, at the core of, be it a CNI, be it a government, be it an educational institution, a medical facility, a transport system, and on she goes, is the model of trust. I'm not going to get on your freeway if I think that there's going to be a car pileup. And effectively, that's what smart cyber does. It needs to facilitate the deliveries of the service in a secure and safe manner, thereby ensuring the comfort and adoption by the community at large. Very different to how we were doing things 10, 15 years ago.
Fantastic, thank you, Alan. And Enrique, as the CTO of Wellness Techgroup, which you know is a large deliverer of smart systems and as well as platforms and hardware technology, you know, how do you go about this? How do you talk to your customers about when you're creating a new product, a new proposition, a new service for them? How do you ensure that you have this view of smart cyber intact with it?
Yeah, interesting question, John. We, as I said, we have been going through this journey, and we figured out that it was better to have a separate cyber entity, so we could counsel our customers. Because the problem here is that with this kind of projects that we take part in, you know, smart street lighting, smart waste, you know, all related to smart cities and smart industries, sadly, right now, cybersecurity or security is not there at the start, right? That's what we have been seeing in the last 2 or 3 years. So we aim.
It's not only that it's weak. It's not only that it's weak. It's actually non-existent in some of these
areas.
Yeah,
in some cases, exactly, it's not in existence. So we aim, and I think that we will talk about that in the outcomes as well. But we aim to have security in the early stages. You know, a minimum framework, internal framework that we can drive with the customer, covering all those aspects that I mentioned, covering technology, which we are part of because we are suppliers or providers, key suppliers in those kind of projects, but also people, business alienation, and the compliance that the customer needs to comply with. So we try to drive that from the early engagement to plant that seed, so we don't have a problem in the future. Because when you try to retrofit, you know, when you have all the project done, and you try to retrofit cybersecurity and you try to patch that over, something that we have been doing since the 80s, you know, it doesn't work well because of all the reasons that Alan and Steve have been talking about, the new era and how the paradigm has shifted now with all the technologies that we're using, the digital space, etc., etc. So we aim to drive that from the beginning from the customer, and we have invested in one separate area so we can drive that from there because we think that it's paramount.
Fantastic, thank you, Enrique. So can we just move on to the next slide as well, please? So behavioural and cultural factors. So I'm going to jump to Alan on this one because I believe Alan does a large amount of training with customers on this area. So if I can ask you first of all, Alan, that would be great.
Absolutely. I just wanted to say that what Enrique was saying was quite correct. At the IoT Security Institute, we also established through our research that very little was being done from the security design from the outset of IoT solutions, simply because they were such wonderful projects and had such associated benefits that they wanted to get out there quickly. And we understood that, and we developed a Smart Cities and Critical Infrastructure Framework, which we released freely to the public, that effectively addressed those things that Enrique was saying of how to incorporate smart city and critical infrastructure frameworks and components as part of any delivery model. So yes, we identified exactly the same gap and absence of information. No shortage of white papers, but certainly a great many considerable gaps with respect to deployment. But on the behavioural and cultural factors, this is a particular area of interest because there are a couple of points I want to make, and I'll make them quickly. From a behavioural perspective, I think from the CNI, the first thing we need to understand is the motivation of hackers or the motivation of states to bring down such institutions or installations. For the obvious reasons, the impact is extraordinary. The media is exceptional, and you really get bang for your buck. And I think in the first around behaviour, when it comes to hacking, when it comes to exploitation of such a nature, it is also, again, it's all about business. So return on investment, the ability to the buy-in to be attempting to bring down CNI infrastructure is a very small cost given the tools, the computers available, and the return on investment is exceptional. And any executive in on this webinar will understand the ratios and the price points of achieving any sort of outcome. And the reason CNI has become so attacked and the numbers have gone up are numerous in nature, political, yes, of course, but also because of their opening up to the world through IP, the internet, connectivity, is that the return on investment is exceptional. And CNI is playing, and many who are doing it well are playing a major catch up to make that cost of buying increase. So hence, the more it costs to hack, the more you have to work out whether it's worth hacking in the first place. And at the moment, CNI is in a rudimentary stage for many organizations in that it's very cheap to buy in. It's like getting Bitcoin at $1. It's a case where CNI, you bring it down and you get all the media in the world and you get all the investment in the world for your next project. But behaviorally, moving on from that point, in the cultural, is the behavior of government. And whether it's UK, Singapore, Australia, irrespective where you live, traditionally governments had the responsibility of protecting a nation. They didn't have much to do with private industry aside from perhaps a few tank contracts, various things like that. But as with recent attacks and with the distribution of technology and its capabilities, they realized that government cannot secure a nation's interests without collaborating with critical infrastructure, without saying to them, look, you've got to play your part because we can't do it on our own. And legislation and amendments throughout the world are reflecting the fact that government is saying, hey, we're going to get involved. And we're going to get involved because we have to ensure that it's become political now. And someone has to be responsible. And you'll see, comments saying that from various politicians that regulators will step in where they believe CNI management executives are not doing enough. There's discussions around situational awareness, where what happens, mandatory reporting, sharing of information, and as I said, at a point of it actually coming in and taking over. So that's the political nature of smart cyber as well within this context. And equally, that feeds into the cultural factor, and the cultural factor comes into the people, the community, the investors, the stakeholders. They're pushing a cultural expectation back upon our politicians, upon our CNI executives, our operators, to provide that level of stability and security in accordance with community expectations. So that's a very critical point. That's why it's become politicized. This is not a hamburger stand that's brought down. This is now effectively a societal function that no one can access. So this is why it's becoming so critical, and the way in which effectively all participants are playing into that space, because the community, ostensibly, when the lights go out, you think it's an inconvenience. I can't watch television.
Yeah.
But research has indicated that CNI breaches bring into question the political capability of our leadership. It brings in our own psychological views on community security and stability, it affects our overall view on the future. Now, I don't wish to over dramatize it, but this is the imperative.
So it's a big impact across multiple, not just the sector, but a big impact across each of the different areas.
Absolutely. Alan's points are completely valid, and I'll bring this back to CNI and what are the behaviour and cultural factors that need to change. I'm going to put a pragmatic angle on it now. So if you look at the slide, I will do it reverse order. And this is something that's been said all the way through. First of all, the organisation, people in charge of the organisation, need to have that intent. Alan has used the word intent.
Yeah.
That intent to want to adopt a smart cyber approach and to recognise the benefits for their industry and their organisation of adopting that smart cyber approach. So that intent and that smart cyber strategy, and here at Enzen we've designed an 8-step model that can walk people through that.
Yeah.
Starts with that intent and having that smart cyber strategy. It then reverses this back to having the right people in place. And there's a wonderful term on the slide, blended T and M shape. So in the old days, the term might have been a generalist. Yeah. So obviously in cybersecurity, you've got very specific SMEs that will do certain things. And then there's people that are more general in what they do. So being a blended T or M-shaped professional effectively means that you're a cyber guy. You're a cyber professional, you're a digital guy, you're a data guy. Mm-hmm. Now you have one maybe primary skill and 2 secondary skills, or 1 primary skill and 3 tertiary skills. And it's saying that you need to have people that are blended in their view in order to protect critical network infrastructure. So you can no longer rely on having a one-dimensional cybersecurity person. In the new world order going forward, they need to have a wider perspective. And Alan, without waving the flag, provides wonderful training. He's one of the only ones in the world, smart cities and critical infrastructure professionals. I myself am one of those. Enzen, at that association with Alan, whereby we can run the training courses. If any CNI operators out there wish to be involved in that, we can come and open those doors and help to take them forward in that area. This is a crucial part.
Okay.
Yes, and I just want to add. I want to add that training is part of the IoT Security Educational Initiative, where it takes actual real-world framework scenarios and the framework that we released to actually equip CNI security professionals and smart city professionals and what we call the next generation of cyber professionals with the necessary skills and viewpoint on how to approach cyber. And Steve makes a good point. It's becoming very different to the way we knew it. And the smart cyber professional of the future will have to be aware of current trends, be they political or economic, to understand how to apply intelligence into protecting infrastructure, because the nature of the sector is becoming exceedingly sophisticated, and the individual has to not only have technical prowess, but also has to have a very good understanding of the world at large, because it is so immediate. Thanks,
Alan. Thank you. And I think that echoes back to that proactive approach for everybody. So absolutely, I think I'd love to just get to our sort of final area, which is outcomes, which I'm sure everybody wants us to discuss. And I know, Enrique, you touched on this a little bit earlier on, so maybe I can just open the floor to you first of all on this one.
Okay, Jan, thank you. Well, I will start in reverse order, because the point that I outlined before was the third one that appears in the slides, right? That is the designing from the beginning, the cybersecurity from the beginning. And this is, I want to emphasize this because this is really important in the complex scenario that we are talking. We're talking about new technologies or new technologies in CNIs or same technologies in CNIs. It doesn't matter. We have been discussing that all this time. I won't repeat myself, but it's a complex scenario. It's a landscape that is changing, and there are several pillars. We saw most of them, and we need to take that into consideration from the beginning. I mean, because these are complex systems that you don't want to touch when they are in production, because they are giving they're adding value to whatever citizens, tourism, other industries. They're adding value, and you want to have a basic cybersecurity seed planted there so it can expand from the beginning. So I cannot express this enough, but that is really, really important. But that can mean the difference between having a sailing on what can you do in cybersecurity and adapting to because the key word here is adapting. You cannot say, okay, I have done a picture of this, now I can do something else for the next 10 years. No, you need to constantly adapt, and that's the smart cyber part of it. And if you have done your homework and you have discussed with the stakeholders and everyone agrees that this is something important that needs to be allocated, you've got a great part of the road ahead, cleared for the future. So I just want to emphasize that the design and security design early in the project and encompassing all the scope that we have been talking about when we talk about smart cyber.
Fantastic, thank you, Enrique. And Steve, one of the things you've got in there is the alignment with wider strategic industry objectives. Do you feel that this is something that each part of the critical national infrastructure needs to do on their own, or is there a collaborative piece there to really bring everybody together to understand what the key threats are and how to counter them?
Well, there is, exactly. And there's something that we advocate a lot. It's called the triple helix model. And that really says that, and Alan alluded to this, policy from a strategic level must come from the nation. Okay. The nation state NCSC sets the policy. As it is now, they may not be using the term smart, but a lot of RFPs, a lot of RFIs, a lot of things that are coming out are alluding quite strongly to data, digital, and cyber convergence. So that's good. They're just not using the smart term. Triple Helix will say there must be a unified collaborative approach between your nation state, industry, CNI, all the be they public or private, CNI, and academia. Academia do the research, and the World Economic Forum produced some wonderful papers on the future of cybercrime. And again, they allude heavily to a converged approach. Outcomes, effectively, if I'm a CISO of a CNI operator, I want to know, how can I reduce my risk? How can I reduce my exposure? How can I reduce my cost? How can I be more efficient in what we do? Where are my assets? And this goes right back to the start of what this webinar was about, which is, if you adopt a smart cyber approach and you see things through the wider lens we've talked about quite extensively, you will reap the benefits of that. There's no magic wand. If you do it in the right way, you will reduce your risk exposure as much as you ever can. You will have better control over your assets. You will use AI and content-based solutions and products that Enrique's organization has, etc., that will help you to do that. So ultimately, I'm that CISO of the organization. I'm listening today. I want to know, what does it really do for me? What's in it for me? And I know I have to persuade my board. I know I have to persuade the top people. I know I have to ensure that I tick all the boxes for compliance and regulations. I know it's a lot of research. I know it's a very fluid world, but I would say, right, okay, you need to sell to me why smart cyber is the way. It's the way because it's done correctly, and if done in the proper way, you will get that reduced cost, the greater efficiencies, the greater effectiveness, the better trained people, the reduced risk, and the reduced risk of cybercrime and taking the network down. And ultimately, that's what it's about. But you'll also do that with a business viewpoint going forward, and not just existing as is today. You've got a target state to work towards as well. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. And Alan, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to ask you to keep it within 60 seconds though, because I'm conscious of the fact that I want to ask questions. So if I can ask you to talk about the outcomes of smart cyber from your viewpoint, that would be really good. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, just to carry on from what Stephen's saying, effectively, security by design is cost efficiency. So the first thing you need to do is, if everything you're doing is security by design, you have a security representative there, you're saving money. You have an engineer deciding what to do before it's done, and so that's always a cheaper option. Secondly, and this is, I was discussing it before, the executive of any CNI has the writing on the wall saying that government is going to ask more, and asking more is going to be required in the ways of artifacts, processes, auditing, compliance, governments. That is no different to any other form of regulation. When you enable smart cyber, you are putting those interfaces into place. You earlier in this piece suggested, are we going to have a special role for this? Well, conceivably, we may have a cyber smart representative that interfaces with the regulator, that provides all of this, who is the conduit between the CNI and the government regulator on these things. So there you see again cost efficiency and alignment of compliance. And finally, we've entered the world of cyber warfare, and we've had passive cyber. We're now having active, proactive cyber, and ultimately, if everything comes through in the end, we're going to have offensive cyber, where governments are going to reach out and find out more in a much more offensive nature. And CNI is going to be part of that equation, because they're going to be a weak point, a touch point for retaliation. I don't want to turn this into an Arnold Schwarzenegger end of days scenario, but this is the world we live in, right? So yeah. CNI is going to, more and more is going to be asked of them to ensure that their doors are locked, their windows are secured, because the government and warfare of the future is, we all know where it's going. So I think that the benefits across the board are cost efficiency, security by design, and good business risk management.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
48 seconds, I think.
Excellent. Well, I think it's been fantastic having this conversation with you guys today. I know that these topics are much vaster, and there's much more detail and depth we can go into. And we've already talked about making this into a series of webinars over the next few months, taking each of these topic areas and really exploring them a bit more. And that's something we will be pushing out on our social media and our communication. So please, everybody watching, do keep an eye out for that. If you have any questions, and this was my part to start, I should have said within the control panel that is in the GoToWebinar that you're using to view this webinar, there is a questions phase. I'm hoping that some of you found that already. I'm going to ask Phil, who's our producer today. I know he's let us know he's already got a few questions. So Phil, if you've got any questions for the panel, and if you want to address them to anybody specifically, please just put either Alan, Enrique, Steve in front of your question, so we know who it's going to. But otherwise, Phil, do you have any questions that you can put forward to the panel?
Yes, we do. Thank you, John, and thank you to Steve, Enrique, and Alan for a really insightful and really interesting discussion. The first question we have in is one for Enrique. The question is, which industries, if any, are already excelling at smart cyber principles and practices?
Thank you, Phil. Well, from our point of view, it's curious, but the industries that are implementing because they need to, or because they see the value in implementing to new technologies right now, that they're in the transition of that implementation, are the ones that are more aware of all of these challenges that we have been talking, and how we need to tie together more things inside those projects that we did in the past. So it's a beginning of the smart cyber approach. There are, to name a few, we could say that surprisingly, all the smart cities projects that we have been seeing around the world, basically, because that's a trend around the world, that makes people realize that they need to tackle that problem from a different approach. But also, we're talking about industries and about industrial IoT here as well. So yeah, I think that the driver has been the introduction of new technology. In this case, we're talking about IoT, communications, software platforms, etc., that enable new use cases that are meaningful to the cities or to the industries. And that's one of the detonators that is like, okay, we need to do something that different here, because this is not working. So basically, that's what our experience is.
Thank you very much, Enrique. The next question is for Steve, and the question is, do you think smart cyber practices will affect the attitudes of citizens, everyday citizens and consumers? If so, how?
The answer is yes, and the reason for that is that we will all be living in smart cities of the future. Almost every city in the world, even where we are near Birmingham, is a smart city. And when you're a citizen of that smart city, you will start to demand more privacy, more understanding, the threats of cyber attacks. People will have an expectation that they want to live in a secure environment. More and more people, and there's some wonderful stats, are moving into cities. There's some figure that over 1 million people a day are moving from rural areas into cities worldwide. And the government and the city authorities have an obligation to protect those people. So I see the convergence of the smart cyber and digital and data and IoT platforms, and certainly having worked out in Saudi Arabia, where there's vast projects taking place. These cities cannot be released without there being an interconnection, an agreement with the citizens. So we will demand more, leaders will have to provide more, and operators of essential services, CNI, in all its forms, will have to step up to the game, and will have to adopt a smart cyber approach, whether they want to or not. They may use a different term, but absolutely we will demand more, and that will be the driver for it.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Steve. And we have a question for Alan. The nature, as you say, of cyber attacks is evolving all the time. How can a cybersecurity professional, especially one working in CNI, how can they keep up to speed with the new threats that are coming down the line?
Well, obviously the educational component is paramount, to be able to understand how CNI operates, what's its business model, what its technical limitations historically. The convergence has brought two worlds together that probably the cybersecurity specialist generally was more comfortable in the IT space, and now we have this converged world of IT, OT. The cyber professional within that space needs to become very aware of how CNI operates, obtain the necessary education on how to secure not only IT aspects of the organization, but also OT. So there needs to be a very clear understanding there. There needs to be an opportunity to engage and to collaborate with specialists that are not within the security, traditionally security field. And when I say that, that extends out to any kind of smart or critical deployment. And I want to say, when we use the word critical infrastructure, a smart city is a critical infrastructure, a hospital is a critical infrastructure, a water supply, et cetera, As we said, we traditionally had 3 fields that were 3 or 4 fields considered as critical infrastructure. I think now we have over 12. So the cyber professional needs to be able to understand those areas from a criticality point of view, from an operational point of view, and then skill themselves accordingly in order to bring those smart cyber skills to that installation or to that ecosystem. The traditional cyber skills that you were picking up 10, 15 years ago, although very relevant still and useful, when applying them to current challenges, if you don't keep up, you'll get left behind. And I just want to finish with that with an example. In a smart city security by design, you'll have to be just as comfortable working with design engineers, urban planners, architects, lighting, IoT lighting specialists, whoever they are, bricks and mortar engineers, as you are working with your own cyber professionals, because the walls have gone down and the interfaces are immense. And to really do your job properly, you need to bring your cyber skills and your outlook into the 21st century.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you guys. We're just about at time. So I think if you have any more questions or any more for any of the panel, please feel free to drop a note to Steve. I'm sure he will get those questions answered for you. I think if you have any inquiries about how to do this within your organisation, again, drop Steve a note and he can help you understand more about the area, what the challenges are, and you can counter those. I'd like to finish off by thanking everybody for joining us. Alan from Australia, thank you very much. I know it's late in the evening for you there. Enrique from Spain, thank you. We really appreciate you joining us. And Steve from the UK, I think it's great. I'm going to ask you one last thing. If you could sum up the challenge of smart cyber in your area in 3 words, what would they be? And I'm going to just pause there for a second, give you a chance to think, and I'm going to go to Steve first.
Okay, there's so many words here. I think it's implementation, and move from strategic to actually doing. There's wonderful papers out there. Everyone in CNI needs to show the return on investment of implementing smart technology. Even step 1, get it.
Brilliant. So you're going to go with one word, which is implementation. Excellent. Alan.
Well, I think first I'll use the 3 words you asked me for. First, be informed. You require the knowledge, you require the skills. Be effective. Ensure, when you're working in such a broad, such a always on, you have to be effective. You can't play too wide. You need to understand what is effective for the business, what is effective for the technology, and ultimately what's effective for the community. And finally, be progressive. Think outside the box. The hackers are thinking outside the box. Everyone's thinking outside the box. And if you're not, you're going to be in the dark.
Fantastic, thank you. And Enrique, I put you to go last, unfortunately, which is where everybody else steals your thunder. So hopefully you've got what you're.
Thank you for that, John. I will be quick. I think that the points that Steve and Alan raised are very valid, but I want to focus on training and awareness, because we're trying to fight new threats with old techniques, and that doesn't work really well. So I think that's a really, really important point.
Fantastic. Well, it just remains for me to say thank you to the panel again, but also thank you for all you people watching. We do appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us. Have a good day, have a good evening, or have a good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Wonderful joining you.